power sometimes falls into the wrong hands. Other times it falls into the really wrong hands. Here, it falls into what could be argued as the silliest hands. Hiya, I'm Ink, they, them pronouns, and welcome to the Nook. This is a series I call Dungeon Deck, where we make strange monsters and NPCs for tabletop RPGs, including a creature card with art, stats, ability names, and core phrases. Now, with that all out of the way, let's get started.
You remember our venerable house, opulent and imperial. It is a festering abomination. I beg you, return home, claim your birthright, and deliver our family from the ravenous, clutching shadows of these fucking goblins.
So, we'll begin the lore by stating the inspiration. If y'all don't recognize that little bit of quotes, it's from Darkest Dungeon, a wonderful entry into the Lovecraftian horror genre, which is also the genre we will be pulling inspiration from. Specifically, I want to look at The Haunter of the Dark, a short story about someone discovering an artifact called the Shining Trapezohedron, a good analog to our Goblin's Pyramid. So, as with most Lovecraftian stories, our protagonist, a goblin, stumbled upon something it shouldn't have, a strange power that is dangerous in mortal hands, let alone a goblin's. So, let's say specifically that this goblin is a resident of a particular dungeon in, let's say, the Breathing Continent. So, for those of y'all who don't know, the Breathing Continent is a setting that I've gradually been building up with various Dungeon Deck episodes by making monsters who live there. The Breathing Continent is a land made of flesh and bone, with all that entails. Random eyes, hands, and mouths sprout out of the ground. Infections cause dungeons to open up from the earth. And now, a goblin in one of those dungeons is about to learn some things it really shouldn't. In The Haunter of the Dark, the Shining Trapezohedron is in a metal box covered in strange designs. But in this story, let's say that it's in a chest with magical but unearthly scripts lining the exterior. Inside is the pyramid along with a bunch of other magical ingredients and implements. Feel free to include that in the loot. The goblin, looking for shinies, of course, ends up opening the chest to see what's inside. Then, as it loots everything, the pyramid catches the goblin's eye. The goblin can't stop staring. It knows that something is staring back through the pyramid, but it doesn't turn away. Transfixed, the goblin brings its face closer and closer and closer to the pyramid until the sharp tip just barely draws blood. The pain shocks the goblin out of its stupor, for now. Over time, the pyramid keeps drawing the goblin's gaze until even the pain of stone-cutting flesh cannot stop its wish to look closer. Eventually, bones break and skin turns concave as the pyramid is completely embedded in the goblin's skull, who now never needs to avert its gaze again. The pyramid shows the goblin all that it needs to see. I'd like to think that the pyramid and goblin together gain unearthly powers, including the ability to draw out the properties of things as auras. For instance, they now can use the poison bottle's concept of toxicity and inflict that idea upon their foes. In addition to poisoning the body, it could poison the mind and soul. I wonder what would happen if it had access to bottles of other substances. And all of a sudden, we have this big boss spellcaster behind an entire infection dungeon. Adventurers, in order to clear out the infection blighting the very continent they stand upon, have to deal with this goblin and the outer worldly powers it wields. Of course, this requires the pyramid's original container to be completely unguarded in the same area as a goblin, which is really unlikely. Unless something very strange happens. Well, that's kind of what occurred. One thing about the Breathing Continent that hasn't been covered yet is what causes these infection dungeons to form and why they're so split up in these ways. Of course, there's the basics of things under the skin of the Breathing Continent, also known as the Underdermis, that shouldn't be there. Sort of like how normal infections happen, but with pus instead of opening up wide chasms of a dungeon. But how did those things get there, and why are they usually like split up? As far as the split up part, one of the things I would like to introduce is the idea that the infection dungeons tend to divide these infecting parties up. So for example, if a ship somehow enters the breathing continent's underdermis, then the masts would be broken off and sent over one place, the hull would be broken off and sent into another, and then the people would be dumped out and sent to a third. As far as things getting into the underdermis in the first place, well, you just don't fall in there. It's not like you can just hop into a hole and you're in the underdermis. Though, you might be able to be swallowed or injected. There are theories, more local legends, that there are mouths on the continent that devour small islands or underwater ruins. And other stories say that there are heretics who try to explore the underdermis, cutting into a bloodstream. Those stories are unsubstantiated by empirical evidence. But still, it's odd that those narratives have cropped up all around the breathing continent, even to areas with little contact to other cities. Now, if y'all are enjoying this, don't forget to curse the like and subscribe buttons with your mouse. I want to see what powers they gain from that. And while you're down there, how about we ask the comments question for this episode? If you were a complex geometric shape in a Lovecraftian story, what horrors would people see when they stare into you? For me, it would be horrifying images of the breathing continent alongside the beauty and functionality of fountain pens. Now, let's pull out that creature card and start filling it in. First off will be the name. I'll defer to my resident expert on goblin nomenclature, Scat the Goblin, for a list of options. Alrighty, here's what he gave me. Glorbo, Bagella, Bitch the Itch, Ick, the Negotiator, Ass spelled A-C-C-E, Prejudice the Dark Angel, Dick, Ronald, Jesus, spelled like Jesus, Bob, who's actually just a human covered in green paint, and there's one more. It's just choking noises with stars around it, so I suppose it's pronounced. For now, let's choose Ass, and we'll call it Ass of the Eldritch Blessing. Don't worry, we'll use these other names elsewhere. Next up are the abilities. These will help illustrate what our cursed goblin can do and what a boss fight might look like. Let's start out with the most apparent part, the pyramid dented into Ass's face. The horrifying vistas of madness unveil ghastly truths to this poor soul. To me, this gives them that general cursed magic in addition to the ability to fold space like fresh laundry. So let's call it non-Euclidean knowledge. Next up will be that property aura ability. It's the main combative tool for Ass and will be a major part of any boss fight. This will be called characteristic miasma. And in addition to poison, let's say that Ass carries a healing potion, hair grease, cave slime of some kind, and a Molotov cocktail, which whenever he has to use it, he always screams, "Molly!" Finally, you know that we gotta include the minions. No goblin would ever be so gauche to be caught alone, unless that's part of a harebrained plot to lure the party into a trap. And of course, this is where you include the names that we got from Scat earlier. But what would we call this ability? I mean, we could just say Goon Squad or Henchmen or Pack of Goblins, but I have a much better set of words. A pester of Yobos! Yobbo, for y'all's reference, is a British slang term for thug and is, in fact, very fun to say. These abilities give a general vibe on how a boss fight with Ass would go. It would teleport around the arena like it was walking through dimensions, spread masses of various properties around, and support the Yobos that will wreck the party with all sorts of goblin tricks. Of course, there's more goblinating to do, to set up a true representation of this battle. But that's the fun that I will never take away from the DM. So enjoy goblinating and let me know how it goes. And make your players regret ever thinking that goblins were a joke. Now we have the stats. We'll be using the D&D 5th edition stat spread, but the numbers will refer to the modifiers instead of the stats themselves. Strength. Wizards and wizardly types don't need to be strong to be magical. In fact, it tends to get in the way of their studies. -1. Constitution. Same here. Magic types tend to be weenies. However, this is countered by the fact that goblins are bouncy and have a similar capacity to resist pain as cartoon characters. 2 points. Dexterity. Goblins, despite their tendency towards slapstick comedy, tend to be quite agile. Even the slapstick support this because goblins never seem to get hurt, no matter how high they fall from. 1 point. Intelligence. Unearthly knowledge is still knowledge, and boy does ass have a lot of it. 5. Wisdom. Continuously staring into this rock that shows you strange and creepy things isn't a good decision. Also, it tends to be hard to see when you have an entire pyramid scrunching your face. -2. Charisma. According to Scat, our resident goblin sociology expert, and this is a direct quote, goblins be funny. 2. These stats give us an image of a classic goblin wizardly type. Not great at making decisions, a weenie in general, but even if you're laughing at its antics, you're gonna still get beat by ass. Finally, we have the core phrases. These are a set of statements or questions that help characterize monsters and guide DMs on how to play these creatures in a unique and interesting way. Unfortunately, the voice for ass needs an interpreter on account of his face being completely dented in. I'll have narrate in its place. Let's try this again. Well then, you know what? Let's get the resident goblin linguistics expert, Scat the Goblin, to help us out on this.
The pyramid has a plan.
This all started because a goblin started staring at a shiny, and it continues as the goblin still stares at the shiny. Things have worked up until now, so why not follow on the orders of this supremely powerful artifact?
We are number 1.
Goblins naturally have an endless supply of confidence. If they even think they can do something, then they can do something, no matter how crappy it turns out. There's a reason that engineers continue to study goblin contraptions in hopes of going goblin mode with their creations.
Yabos need yabos? I mean, what the fuck is the
If you're a goblin leader, you need goons to command. No matter how skilled, competent, or even capable they are, those minions will be the backbone of your operations and carry you to victory. And if you end up with a Muppet movie's worth of jokes along the way, then that's just a bonus. Overall, this sets up a wild faction within the Infection Dungeon that fills the whole place with goose, gaffs, and possibly even a boss fight. This kind of situation will allow players to join in on the world's jokes as well as building in some cool loot. Just imagine what would happen if the players got a hold of the pyramid themselves. So, grab ass and slap it into a dungeon and let me know how it goes. Alrighty, that is a wrap on the video. Surgery definitely slowed things down for this vid, but it was nice to have some time to just sit on my butt and play some games. Also, I would like to mention that I wrote the script up to this point before I knew the goblin names, so all the puns are unintentional, and it was much worse when the guy's original name was Dick. Also, I'm gonna try something new with the process of making these videos. It might make things a little easier to make more videos for y'all. I'll keep you updated on the plan though, once I am done with that sort of experiment. Alrighty, with that, let's bring this video to a close. For those of you with dark skies, good night. And if you have bright days, good morning. Whatever part of the world you're from, I hope you have a lovely morning, afternoon, evening, and night. Goodbye!